All right, I will say good morning, good morning. Such a schos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to start a new week of Maseches Nedarim together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becker Friedman, for dedicating the Shu'urim and Drushos this month. Le'ilui Nishmas, Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda, Ben Rav Chaim Rafael. To thank Sammy and Malka Esterson for dedicating, the Shu'urim and Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Henach Ephraim, as well as in the continued zichos for the Gesund and Hatzlacha of their father, Mr. Morton Esterson, Ad Me'eh Ve'esim Shanim Tovos. To thank the Pepper family for dedicating all the Shimon Droshos this month, the commemoration of the yard site of Shmuel's brother, Yosef Pepper, Yosef David Zichron Levracha Ben Yaakov. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Lav and Aliyah, and the families in Nechama. With that, let us begin. We have a really beautiful daf ahead of us today. And let's begin. Today's daf, brand new parak, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Nun Daled 54, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the top of the Amid. Hanodr min hayarek. So we are really continuing on the same base. First of all, a welcome back to Saeed Haken. Baruch Rofei Cholim. Baruch Hashem, wonderfully Saeed to have you back in the shir. Many years of continued gesund ahead of you. All right, we'll say with that, let us begin. So really continuing on the same basic theme that we've been focusing on, namely, when a person makes a neder, remember the overarching or guiding line principle in Nedarim is Holchin Achar Lashon Bnei Adam. When you make a neder, so the scope of your neder is defined by the manner in which people normally speak. So if you use a word, you use a term, you use a phrase, we look at the way that word, term, or phrase is used colloquially, and then we use that definition to determine the scope of your neder. So continuing in that same theme, Hanodr min hayarek. So we'll say literally translated, a person makes a neder not to get benefit from vegetables. Although again, often in this context, it's interesting that yarek is often translated as greens instead of vegetables. But again, we could just go with vegetable. Hanodr min hayarek. So someone goes in and makes a neder not to go ahead and get benefit from a vegetable. Mutar b'deluin. They are permitted to go ahead and eat gourds. Eat gourds. So what's the pshat? Take a look at the Ran. So the Ran, top Ran is on the left side of the page. Hanodr min hayarek mutar b'deluin. Delo havi yarek elapri. For the simple reason that a gourd, interestingly enough, says the Gemara, says the Ran, does not fall into the vegetable category, rather it falls into the pre-category, fruit category. So ve'istim efarshi distam yerek nechol kamoshu chai idulun enon kain. So we'll say actually the Ran gives two interpretations here. One possibility is that if you make a neder not to eat vegetables, gourds are excluded, i.e. you can eat a gourd. Why? Possibility number one is because a gourd is not in the vegetable family, but rather, again, it's more in the fruit family. Possibility two, interestingly enough, is the Ran says the definition of a vegetable is something that can be consumed raw, that can be consumed in an uncooked state, and gourds cannot be consumed raw. Okay, fine, two different interpretations. Now watch this. Rabbi Akiva Oser. Rabbi Akiva says no. If you make a neder not to eat yarek, if you make a neder not to eat vegetables, you also can't eat gourds. So Rabbi Akiva v'alo omer la'adam l'shlucho. So we'll say, we're going to watch this. So now we have a fundamental machlokes. Between what we'll call the Tanakama, the Rabbanon, and Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbanon say you make a neder not to eat vegetables, you are allowed to go and eat gourds. Rabbi Akiva says you make a neder not to eat vegetables, you can't eat gourds. So now watch this. The Rabbanon tried to slug up Rabbi Akiva, tried to refute Rabbi Akiva. What do they say? Amrlo Rabbi Akiva. So the Rabbanon said Rabbi Akiva, Valo Omer Adam L'Shlucho, Kach Li Yarek. Says to Rabbi Akiva, imagine the following case. Right? I say to my shaliach, I say to my agent, right? To my agent, I say to my servant, right? Go ahead and get me vegetables. Right? I say to my shliach, go get me vegetables. So what happens? The shliach goes and he comes back and he says, well, v'hu omer lo matzasi ela diluin. And the shliach says, you know what? I wasn't able to go ahead and get vegetables. Instead, I got you a gourd. Instead, I got you gourds. So the Rabbanan say to Rabbi Akiva, in other words, what the Rabbanan say to Rabbi Akiva is, look, If a shaliach were to come back with gourds, he would have to explain, I didn't get vegetables, I only got gourds. From the fact that he's saying, listen, I couldn't get you what you wanted, but I got the next best, indicates to us what? That a gourd is not a vegetable. And therefore the Rabbanan say, if you make a neder not to go ahead and consume yerek, by definition, you are permitted to eat a gourd. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. Amar Lahem Rabbi Akiva says, no, you don't understand. You just proved my point. How did you prove my point? Keina davar, o shema omerhu, lo matzasi elekitnis. So we'll say, for example, now watch this. This is fascinating. Rabbi Akiva says, exactly, you just proved my point. The fact that when a shaliach doesn't go ahead and find vegetables, what does he buy instead? A gourd indicates to us that what? That a gourd is still within the vegetable family. V'haraya, a shaliach would never say, I sent my shaliach to get vegetables. Can you imagine him coming back? Now the Mishnah's example is, would he ever come back and say, I couldn't get you vegetables, so I got you kidneys. I got you legumes. He would never say such a thing, or just like to amplify it, like if I send him a shliach to get vegetables, right? He would never say, you know what? I couldn't find vegetables. I brought you back a steak, right? In other words, the only time a shaliach would substitute is when the substitution is still within the ballpark, right? When the substitution is still close enough. So Rabbi Akiva says exactly the fact that when the shaliach can't find vegetables, he'll go ahead and bring back a gourd, proves my point that a gourd is still within the yerek family. And therefore says Rabbi Akiva, when a person goes in and makes a neder not to eat vegetables, by definition that includes a gourd as well. Incredible. Ella shadilun bechlal yerek, the kitnis elo bechlal yerek. Why is that? Because a gourd is still in the vegetable family. Kitnis, legumes, is not within the vegetable family. So we'll say, so this is the fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan. Simple case, I make a neder not to eat vegetables, right? Rabbi Akiva says, the Tanakama, Rabbanan say, you're permitted to eat gourds. Rabbi Akiva says, you're not permitted to eat gourds. And again, it seems to be that their machlokes is in Metzias. Just Rabbanan hold that since a shaliach would not just simply substitute a gourd for vegetables unannounced, therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, it's not a vegetable. Rabbi Akiva says the fact that it would be substituted when you can't find vegetables indicates to us what? It's still within the family. We'll say the Mishnah ends off, v'aser b'pol hamitzri, if you go ahead and you make a neder not to eat vegetables, you are not permitted to eat the pul hamitzri, which was this Egyptian lentil, lach, if it's moist, umutar b'yavesh, but you would be permitted to eat it if it's moist. Okay. Fine. So we'll say, let's see the Gemara. Hanod min yarek. So the Gemara says like this. So we'll say, so now here's what's interesting. Vaha min yarek nadar. So we'll say, here's the problem. Leaving aside the back and forth between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabban and the Mishnah, even Rabbi Akiva agrees that what? That a gourd is not a vegetable, right? In other words, I will say, if you look at the exchange over here, right? So Rabbi Akiva is saying, yeah, but it would be substituted. At the end of the day, if you get Rabbi Akiva alone for a few minutes, right? Imagine you have a few moments alone with Rabbi Akiva. What's going to be the first question you're going to ask him? Rabbi Akiva, come on, is a gourd really a vegetable? Right? By the way, don't make that the first question in Meretz Hashem. But right, in Meretz Hashem, a couple of weeks from now, we'll be zocha to daven mincha by the kever Rabbi Akiva. Halavai, before that in Meretz Hashem, we'll have Tchias HaMesim Mashiach. We'll be able to see Rabbi Akiva, hear shir from Rabbi Akiva. I will say, but again, here's the shayla. If you have to ask Rabbi Akiva, is a gourd a vegetable or not? Rabbi Akiva would say, Chaver, don't be so afraid to take a stand on things in life, right? In other words, like you might get it wrong. You might get the answer wrong. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong, right? I'm sorry? Right, correct. Thank you. Right? If you were to ask Rabbi Akiva would say, a gourd is not a vegetable. A gourd is not yerek. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I just want to tell you how apropos this was. See, I will say, this was a perfect example of what happened during Hanukkah. Right? During Hanukkah, many people saw things that were going wrong. No one was willing to take a stand until the Kohanim came along. Right? The Kohanim were the ones who were willing to say, this is ridiculous. Right? Everybody's sitting around drinking coffee, right? And what happens, right? and no one wants to go ahead and take a stand. No one wants to give an answer. No one wants to say this is right, this is wrong. The Kohanim. It's always the Kohanim. Right, Alan? Your Alta Zaydus. Mamish took a stand this night, tonight. And Hashem, you follow in their footsteps. A little less dramatic, I'm going to say, like, okay, dealing with gourds. But, all right, but Lamaisa, if you ask Rabbi Akiva, is a gourd a vegetable or not? Rabbi Akiva would say, no, it's not a vegetable. So the Gemara says, I don't understand what's going on over here. V'hamin yerek nadar. The neder we're talking about in the Mishnah, the neder we're talking about in the Mishnah, is he took a neder not to eat vegetables. So why is a gourd even coming up over here? To which the Gemara says, Amru Ula, okay, because we have to qualify this a little bit, Rabbi say. So again, look at the Ran for just a moment. The Ran in the short lines, 3 lines in, V'hamin yarek nadar, the Rabbi Akiva parich. So the Ran says, this is a question Rabbi Akiva, heichi asr b'diluin. Rabbi Akiva, I don't understand. How are you saying that a gourd is included in vegetables? Min yerek nadar udiluin lav yerek. In other words, I will say, this is not a machlokis over here. Rabbi Akiva is not. It's not that Rabbi Akiva has a different definition of what's a vegetable. Even Rabbi Akiva holds that a gourd is not in the vegetable family. It's not a yerek. If it's not a yerek, then why would it be included in the neder? Watch this. Says the Gemara. A couple of different answers. Amr Ula ba'omer yarki kedera alai. Now, I will say, because the lashon of the neder is actually not yarek is asr to me, but rather yarki kedera, the vegetables of the pot. The vegetables of the pot. So I will say, so maybe, because he's not just saying vegetables, but rather he's saying vegetables that go into the pot, so maybe that comes to include diluin as well. Vidilma yerek hanecha b'kedera kamar. Maybe just talking about, again, the type of yerek. Ultimately, again, that's eaten in the pot. To which Gemara says, you're right. Pa'omer yerek hamisbashel b'kedera alai. Oh, but I'll say, here we go. The lashon of the neder that we say is the guy is saying, the vower in question is saying, yerek hamisbashel b'kedera. Konam yerek hamisbashel b'kedera. Any vegetables cooked in a pot are usher to me. Now, we'll say, let's take a step back for just a moment. So now, see, here's the issue. If a person would just say, konam yerek alai, vegetables are usher to me, would he be usher to eat a gourd? No. Right? No. Why? Because in that case, again, everyone agrees a gourd is not in the yerek family. Everyone agrees. Even Rabbi Akiva agrees. What's unique, says the Gemara, about the verbiage being used in the neder over here, is it's yerek hamis konam, yerek hamis bashel b'kedera. Any vegetable cooked in the pot is usher to me. So I'll say, now look at the Ran for one more moment. Yerek hamis bashel b'kedera alai. It's about 6 lines up from before the lines, or 7 lines up from before the lines become wide, the intermediate wide lines. Yerek hamis bashel b'kedera alai. V'chol ki agav nasulei Rabbi Akiva. The chayvon de diluin mamlich shliach alayhu aser bahen. The Rabbi say, so Rabbi Akiva sees it like this. You're adding in some additional modifier to vegetables. In other words, had you just said vegetables are aser to me, so vegetables are vegetables. A gourd is not a vegetable. You'd be permitted in gourds. But now what you're doing is you're somehow expanding the category, right? And what are you saying? Yerek hamis bashal b'kedera. Vegetables cooked in the pot. Now I will say, if you just meant to include just vegetables, what could you have said? Vegetables. The fact that you're expanding, right? Any time in Nedarim that you expand or somehow you change the verbiage. So now, vegetables cooked in a pot are usher to me. So now, now in Rabbi Akiva's view, that's coming to expand the category. And in Rabbi Akiva's view, what are you expanding it to? Any items that could be potential vegetable substitutes as well. What's a good example of a vegetable substitute? A gourd. V'haraya, if I send my shaliach to go ahead and pick up vegetables, and there are no vegetables, he'll come back and he'll say, what? I couldn't find vegetables, but I got you a gourd. So therefore, again, we're expanding the category here a little bit. So the Gemara says as follows. And we'll say, if you take a look, well, actually, let's go back to the Gemara. So Ma'kamiflagi. So we'll say, so what are they arguing about? Here we go. Rabbanan Savri, Kol Milsa, Detzarech Shlicha Lim Luchiala, Lav Minahu. The Rabbanan say like this. Anything, right? If I dispatch a shaliach to go ahead and get something for me, and he comes back and asks me about substituting a different item for the item that I asked for. So the Rabbanan would say, so for example, I send my shaliach to go ahead and get vegetables, if the shaliach would have to come back and say to me, listen, I couldn't get vegetables, but I can get you gourds, the fact that he has to ask about the substitution indicates what? They're not the same category. And therefore, again, the Rabbanon will say, any form of neder that is on yerek, that is on vegetables, by definition does not include gourd. Rabbi Akiva Savar, Kol milsa de mimlach shliach Allah minehu. Rabbi Akiva says that Allah Chalamaisa, no. Anything that this is interesting. I'll say literally just opposite shita. So Rabbi Akiva says anything that the shliach would ask you about substitution for is part of the category. Okay, Rabbi Akiva's logic is, so if I send my shliach to go ahead and get vegetables, and he comes back and says, listen, I can't get you vegetables, but I can get you gourds, the fact that in the shaliach's mind, a gourd is a potential substitute for vegetables indicates to us what? That it's in the ballpark. That it's in the ballpark. But I will say, but again, I just want to be clear, a very important modification here happened in the Gemara, which is where the Gemara is holding right now, and this is going to be the halacha l'maisa. If a person just says, konam yerek alai, konam yerek alai, what's included in the neder? What's included? Vegetables. What's excluded from the neder? Gourds. Now, by the way, of course, it's not just gourds, right? It's anything that's not a vegetable, right? But even gourds. Now, what's the case now that the Gemara saying our Mishnah is? Where a person says, konam yerek hamisbashal b'kedera. Right? I hereby vow that I will not partake of vegetables cooked in a pot. Now we'll say what's happened is the fact that you decided to modify yerek by saying misbashal b'kedera indicates to us what? That perhaps you're potentially widening the field. You're potentially including other things. Well, what else would you be including? According to the Rabbanon, nothing else. According to the Rabbanon, yerek hamispashal b'kedera is no different than yerek. According to Rabbi Akiva, what is it coming to include? Potential substitutions. So what are potential substitutions for vegetables? A gourd. And therefore Rabbi Akiva will say in this case, dafka in this case, halacha l'maisa, you can't eat gourds as well. We'll say fantastic. Now the truth is we're going to broaden this machlokes a little bit, and we're going to see it's quite fascinating. Tanan hasam. Shaliach sha'osa shlichusa ba'al bais ma. We'll say, okay, a little bit of background over here. Mi'ila. Right? What's mi'ila? Mi'ila is illegal, mundane use of consecrated temple property. So on a most basic level, I'm walking by the Beis HaMikdash, halavai, we should be zocha b'karov. I will say, what happens? I see that there's a pile of wood right by the Beis HaMikdash. I say, fantastic. I'm in the middle of building a deck. So you know what? I take some of the wood, I build it into my deck. That's called mi'ila. And it's illegal, obviously. And again, there's a whole restitution process for that. So we'll say, here's what's fascinating. What happens if I send a shaliach, right? I send Ruvain to go pick up the wood that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, bring it to me and build my deck. So I will say, in general, we say, ein shliach lidvar avera, right? There's no shliach for the performance of an avera, right? I will say, let me just give you an extreme example of this. I dislike Shimon very much. I say, Ruvain, I'm hiring you, right? You're my shaliach to kill Shimon, right? Ruvain goes, Chas Shalom, he kills Shimon, and I will say, what happens? What's Ruvain's defense? Shlucho shal adam kimoso. It wasn't me. It's really Silber, right? I'm his shaliach. A shaliach is an extension, right, of the principle, and therefore Silber's chayiv. We will say in general, we say ein shliach lidvar avera. If you do something wrong, the shaliach has responsibility for his own actions. The shaliach is not considered to be an extension of the principle. There is one exception to this rule in halacha, which is me'ilah. So if I dispatch Ruvain to go ahead and do something that is me'ilah, assuming Ruvain did not know that it was me'ilah, Ruvain is pater, and I, the mishaleach, the principal, am going to be chayiv. But that is only true if Ruvain follows my instructions. If Ruvain deviates from my instructions, then Ruvain is chayiv, and I am pater. The logic being that since he did not follow my instructions, therefore what? He's not my agent, right? Anytime an agent goes ahead and differs from the instructions that he is given, ultimately, again, he has broken the shlichus. Now watch this. Tanan hasam. Here we go. So Tanan hasam. Hashliach she'asa shlichuso. If a shaliach does his shlichus, we'll say this is talking about a me'ilah case, right? We'll see in just a moment. If the shaliach executed his shlichus as he was told, so what's the halacha? Bal habayis ma'al. then I, the mishaleach, the principal, the principal, I've committed me'ilah. Lo asa shlichuso. However, again, if the shaliach deviates from his shlichus, then shliach ma'al. Then ultimately, again, the shaliach has gone ahead and committed me'ilah. So the Gemara says, Mantana, who is the opinion that's reflected over here? We'll see what this means in just a moment. So the Gemara says, Mantana, Amrav Chista, Masnisin de lo Rabbi Akiva. This is not like Rabbi Akiva. How Rabbi say? Here we go. This nan. So Rabbi say this Mishnah that we're about to quote now is a continuation of the previous Mishnah. It's the same Mishnah. So the Mishnah outlines the principle. What's the principle? When it comes to Me'ilah, if the Shaliach executed the agency as he was told to do, the Shaliach is not liable for Me'ilah. The Mishaleach, the principle, is. If the Shaliach deviated from his instructions, then the Shaliach is liable, and ultimately, again, the Mishaleach, the principle, is pater. So watch this. This is not Ketzad, Amrlo. So let's say, I said to the Shaliach, Tein basala archim. So also here's the case. Imagine for a moment, I have kodesh meat. I have sacrificial meat. Okay, now say we're talking about a case over here of shogeg, right? This is all shogeg case. I have a piece of meat. I was at the Beis Hamikdash. I accidentally took the wrong meat. I come home with sacrificial meat. Okay, so now, and I'm having guests. I tell my agent, Amar lo tein basala archim. I tell my servant, who's my agent, give meat to our guests. V'nasalim kaved. He doesn't give them meat. Instead, what does he do? He gives them liver. So this is all kodesh stuff. Or tein kaved v'nasalim basar. Or I told the shaliach, give the guests liver. And what happens? He gave them meat. So we're saying all of these cases, what happens? The shaliach deviated from the instruction. So because of that, hashaliach ma'al. Ultimately, again, did I skip a line over here? Yeah, Amr Abaye. Okay, good. I'll come back to you in just a moment. Okay, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Sorry. So listen to this. So what happened? So if the shaliach deviates, I told the shaliach give meat, he gives liver. I tell him give liver. Ultimately, again, he gives meat. What's talacha? Hashaliach ma'al. Ultimately, again, the shaliach committed me'ilah. Good. So as I say, anytime. So once again, this is unique. Why is this unique? Because in general, we say ein shliach ledvar aveira. So you would have thought that in any of these cases, the shaliach should be chayiv. He committed me'ilah. Me'ilah is an exception to the rule, and yesh shliach ledvar aveira. There is agency for the commission of sin only by me'ilah. It's unique drasha by me'ilah. So again, generally, if the shaliach follows through on what I told him, then I, the principal, will be liable for me'ilah. The shaliach is pater. Shaliach deviates. In that case, now the shaliach is acting on his own. He's gone rogue. He's chayiv, and I, the principal, am pater. So the Gemara says as follows. Whose opinion does this reflect? Be Rabbi Akiva. So I'll say, can't be Rabbi Akiva. Why? So watch this. So this is incredible. It's incredible. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, Ham Rabbi Akiva, Kol milsa de mimlach Allah shliach minehu limo balabais lo noshech. We'll say, watch this. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Akiva holds that anything that a shaliach would come back and substitute is within the ballpark. So we'll say, now watch this. In general, if I ask my shaliach to go out and buy some meat, and he can't find meat, what will he substitute? Right? Or I should say, would he substitute liver? So, yeah. Right? So therefore, what does that tell you? Liver's in the ballpark. So we'll say, now watch this. The Gemara suggests as follows. If that's the case, then in the Me'ilah, going back to the Me'ilah case, when I tell shaliach serve the guests meat, and the shaliach serves them liver, or vice versa, I say serve them liver, he serves them meat. Really, in that case, I, the balabayas, right, the mishaleach, the principal, should be chayiv, according to Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because lemaisa, it's in the ballpark, and when it's in the ballpark, when it would be substituted, then ultimately it's part of the same min. So according to Rabbi Akiva, in the case of me'ilah, the shaliach should not be viewed as going rogue and acting of his own volition, but rather he should still be considered as if he's acting on my behalf. So obviously this does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. To which the Gemara says, no, Amr Abaye, I feel Tim Rabbi Akiva. No, this could still be Rabbi Akiva. I will say a very important qualification here. Mi lo mod Rabbi Akiva de tzarich im luchei. They both say this is incredible. They both say this is very interesting. Remember, according to Rabbi Akiva, even in these cases where shaliach substitutes, I will say a shaliach is never permitted to substitute without what? Without what? Without asking. Shabbos say this is incredibly important, and this goes all the way back to the beginning as well. It's true that let's say when I dispatch my agent to go out and buy vegetables, would he potentially substitute if he can't find vegetables, he'll substitute a gourd. But it's not just the pshat that he's substituting on his own. What's happening? He's coming back. And he's telling me, by the way, Silber, I couldn't find vegetables, but gourds are available. So same thing over here. In other words, when Rabbi Akiva speaks about that something that could be substituted is still within the ballpark, the shaliach never has the right to substitute without first asking. So too over here in the case of Me'ilah, while it's true that if I sent my agent to buy meat and he couldn't find meat, would he go ahead and substitute liver? Sure, with asking first. Therefore, in this case over here, Abosai, where I tell the shaliach, in the Me'ilah case, I tell shaliach, give meat to the guests, and he gives liver, he's going rogue. He's working on his own volition. Again, had he come back and say, you know what, there's no more meat, I'll substitute liver, okay, then he would be acting on my behalf. But Lamaisi, when he makes a substitution on his own, halach Lamaisi, he's acting, therefore, of his own volition, and therefore his actions are no longer connected to me, and therefore he's chayiv mi'ilah, I am not chayiv mi'ilah. Incredible. Abosai, take a look at Rashi. Take a look at Rashi on the left-hand side, top of Rashi and Dalam base. Shaliach, so shliach balabayis va'afakav v'sel diminehu b'milsa d'tzarich lemluche hachi baile l'meimar shliach balabayis rod se'ata she'etein lem kavet v'cheivan de lo mimlach lo asa shlichuso pasha shliach. So both say, even Rabbi Akiva holds that an item which would normally be substituted is within the same ballpark. The shaliach still has to ask before he makes a substitution. Go switch over to the right hand side to the Ran. Look at the Ran. Hilchach le'inyan mi'ilas shliach vaday kevan l'tzarchim luche v'lo mimlach adaite denafshe ka'avid ubala bayis nami samich dekol kama de lo mimlach lo yitein lahem kaved hilchach lo asa shlichuso. So both say even in this form of substitution, it's only permitted if the shaliach first asks permission. If he doesn't ask permission, then he's acting on his own volition, and therefore he's going to be chayiv for me'il. Aval le'inyan nedarim. Now here's where the Ran differs from Rashi. Aval le'inyan nedarim kevan de bechlal lishnehu dehamimlach aleim shlicha noder amai samich elavadai bekulo asar nafshe. Now here's what's interesting. Going back to Nedarim for just a moment. Rabbi say, right? Because remember again, we're hyper-focused on Nedarim. And Rabbi Akiva says like this. Rabbi Akiva says that Allah Lamaisa, when it comes to Nedarim, so remember, as long as something would be potentially substituted, granted, the Shaliach has to ask before he substitutes. But Lamaisa, anything he would ask to substitute, by definition, is included in the neder. So kind of just bringing this full circle. So bringing it full circle, again, remember, we're getting into a technicality over here by Me'ilah, right? So by Me'ilah, all the Gemara is suggesting is the statements we made before, which I will say, remember again, so the case we just had over here, where again, I accidentally bring home sacrificial meat, all right? And what happens? I tell my servant, give our guests meat. The servant, instead of giving them meat, gives them liver, or vice versa. What's the halacha? The shaliach committed me'ilah and not the balabayis. And again, even Rabbi Akiva would agree with that, because Rabbi Akiva over here would have to say that even though liver could be substituted for meat, the shaliach has to ask. And if he doesn't ask, then by definition, he's acting on his own volition. But again, that does not share anything that we established beforehand. In the case of Nedarim, what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, yes, if I sent my agent out to buy vegetables and he couldn't find vegetables and he wants to buy gourds, does he have to come back and ask before he buys gourds? Does he have to come back and ask? Yes, of course. But the fact that he would ask about gourds tells us that what? A gourd is in the Yerek family, and therefore, when you make the neder, as we said before, the neder is Yerek hamispashal konam, Yerek hamispashal bikidera, gourds are included in that. Incredible. So we'll say, by the way, just before we go on, I just want to go back to the line that I skipped, which was the middle of the page. Rabbi Akiva Savar, I'm going out of order here. Kol misl de mimlach shliach alei minehu. I'm sorry, that's not what I skipped. Amar Abaye, Mod Rabbi Akiva li'ingin malkus she'ena loka. So we'll say this is very important. Abaye just clarifying, by the way, when we say that according to Rabbi Akiva, a gourd is considered as part of the neder for vegetables. Even Rabbi Akiva agrees that halacha l'maisa, if you eat a gourd, you will not get malchus for violation of your neder. In other words, I remember again, in general, we haven't really spoken about this all that much, but in general, if you go ahead and you make a neder, and then you violate your neder, you get malchus for neder violation. All Abai is saying is, as much as according to Rabbi Akiva, a gourd is included in yerek, if you ate a gourd, you would not get malchus for neder violation. Interesting. If you ate a vegetable, you get malchus. If you ate a gourd, you wouldn't get malchus. The Ran explains, I'll just read this outside. If you want to look, it's in the wide lines in the Ran, 2, 4, 5 lines in the widest lines. The Ran says, Am Rabbi Mod Rabbi Kiva le'inya malchus, techevon diluin lo mishtami bahadei elamei ribuyi delishna. Because remember again, Abosai, why are gourds included over here? Because you added in this phrase, mispashal b'kedera, not because of yarek. Not because of yarek, because mispashal b'kedera. Afagav the mamlish shliach alei lo misri bevadai ela misfeka. So, well, it's very interesting. Even Rabbi Akiva, who includes a gourd, is not including a gourd definitively. He's including it out of suffix. Out of suffix. So, because he's including it out of suffix, therefore, halacha l'maisa, we're going to say you can't eat the gourd. But if you did, you will not get malchus for neder violation. Beautiful. All right, we'll say back to Nun Dalan on base 54b. I'm sorry for that lapse. Second line, Itmar Shmai Tekamei de Rava. They said over this whole thing in front of Rava, right? This whole thing in front of Rava. Now, both say, what whole thing? This whole explanation, how the Shita of Rabbi Akiva aligns with the case of Me'ilah. That even the Mishnah of Me'ilah could go according to Rabbi Akiva. Amar Lahen, so right, Rava said, Shapir Amar Nachmani. Rabbi say Nachmani is Abaye. Abaye said good. By the way, Mantan the Palagli Rabbi Akiva. Who is the opinion who argues on Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi is very interesting. It's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi say, what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel say? Listen to this. So this Sanya, very interesting case. Hanoja min habasar. Listen to this case. Person makes a neder not to eat meat. Aser b'chol minei basar. Such a person is not permitted to eat all types of meat. Furthermore, what else is he not allowed to eat? Va'asar, berosh, can't eat the head of the animal. Baraglayim, the feet of the animal. Bekana, the esophagus. Bekaved, the liver. Ubalev, and the heart. Right? All of these other parts of the animal you also can't eat. Ubaofos, you also can't eat fowl. Can't eat birds. Right? So, in other words, according to this first opinion, basar includes all parts of the animal and also includes birds. Umutter, what can you eat? Umutter babasar dagim echagavim. But you can eat fish, and you can eat grasshoppers, locusts. Okay, so we'll say that's the first opinion. Shmuel says, and I will say, by the way, this would also go ahead and fit very well with Rabbi Akiva, right? Why? Because Rabbi Akiva, remember again, anything that a shaliach would substitute is included in the category. So if I dispatch my shliach to go ahead and get meat, again, if you can't find primary meat, so the head, the feet, the liver, the heart, right, the windpipe, right, the esophagus, right, so all the windpipe, all of these things ultimately again would be included. Chicken, right, fowl would be included, but not fish. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Hanoja min habasar. Aser b'chol minei basar. So listen to this. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says if you make a neder not to eat meat, so you can't eat all types of meat. But watch this. Umutter. He holds that you're allowed to eat berosh, raglayim, kana, v'kaved, ubalev, ubaofos. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says if you make a neder not to eat meat, you are allowed to eat the head of the animal, the feet, the kana, the windpipe, the liver, the heart, and you're allowed to eat fowl. And of course, you could also eat fish and locusts as well. The Rebbe will say, now what's the chap over here? So actually, we'll see. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel also said, listen to this. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel held, kirbayim lav basar va'ochlein lav bar inish. Wow. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, by the way, the kishkas, right? The kishkas, kirbayim literally means the intestines, right? But it means all the internal parts of the animal, right? The kirbayim are not meat, and those who eat it are not normal people. All right, so this is a knock on the kishka eaters, right? So now listen, this is war, right? These are fighting words. So now watch this. So the Gemara says, by the way, what's the pshat? What does that mean? That ochleim lav anash lav bar inish? Listen to this. He says, no. Ochleim kibasar le'inyan zvini lav bar inish. People who pay the same amount of money for intestines as the same price as regular meat are not normal people. In other words, I was going to say, so Rabbi Shmuel is saying is, do people eat it? Sure, they eat it. But again, you buy those parts of an animal at a discount, right? Those are the discounted parts of the animal. But anyone who pays regular meat prices for the kishkas, ultimately, again, Lav Bar Inish is not a regular person. I will say, if you take a look at the Rush, so the Rush says over here, the Rush is in the left-hand column, about 8 lines up from before the Rush ends, he says, Ochleini ki basar le'inyan zvini, misha maniach basar v'kona elu. So we'll say, it's interesting, according to Rashi, what Rabbi Shmuel is saying is, anyone who goes in and pays regular price for these items are problematic. According to the Rush, what it's saying is anyone who has the ability to buy regular meat, but buys the intestines instead, is not a regular person. Okay? So, Maishna, Basar Ofla Tanakama, the Asr, so listen to this. So, according to Tanakama, why is it? So, Rabbi Shmuel is pointing out over here, Rabbi Shmuel is the opinion who argues on Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, Maishna Basar Ofla Tanakama the Asr. So we'll say, let's go back to Tanakama. So the first opinion said that if a person makes a neder not to eat meat, they also can't eat chicken. They also can't eat chicken. So the Gemara says, why is that Asr? It's very simple. So the Gemara says, Da'avid shliach de mimlach alei. Because it will say it's very common that if I send my shaliach to go buy meat, and what happens? He can't find meat, but he can't find chicken. He'll come back and he'll tell me, by the way, I can't find meat. In other words, chicken is a substitute. It's a meat substitute. So because it's a meat substitute, therefore it's included in the neder. But 1 second. Basar dogim nami avid shliach, dilo mishkach bisra, mimlach alei. Da'amar ilo mishkachna bisra, aisi dogim. V'listeru. But fish often is the same thing. I was say the Gemara is just making a Metziah statement that it was common that if I send my shaliach to go ahead and buy meat, and he could not find meat, right? And let's say he couldn't find fowl either, maybe it would be normal for shaliach to say, I can't find meat, but I can get you some good fish. So fish is also a substitute for meat. If that's the case, then when a person makes a neder prohibiting meat, that neder should also include what? Should also include fish. To which the Gemara says, no, Rabbi, what's the case? Kigon shehekis dam de lo achil dagim. The case Rabbi saying question is where the person who's making the neder, right? The person who's making the neder ultimately again did bloodletting. So Rabbi say apparently after bloodletting you would never eat fish. Fish. If you look at the Ran says over here, Kigon shehekis dam kodem nidro v'cheivan shekelon is kavin lesser basar dagim tahabalav hachi lo achal minayu. So we'll say the case in question is where the person who made the neder not to eat meat, right before he made the neder, what did he do? He did bloodletting. He let blood. Is that a term? Right. He engaged in bloodletting. Right. So what happened? So we'll say everyone knows. Right. We've seen this by the way throughout our journey in Shas. There are certain foods you don't eat after bloodletting. Right. What's the good foods to eat after bloodletting? Right, fatty meat and strong wine, which apparently go with everything, right? They go with every occasion, every situation, right? So I'll say, so again, the one thing you don't eat is fish. So the Gemara is suggesting that the guy who's making the neder, konam basar alai, had just engaged in bloodletting, so it's clear that he didn't mean to include fish because he would never eat fish anyway. Rabbi, it goes good. If that's the case, then chicken, fowl, should also not be included in his neder. Why not? Amar Shmuel, demesukar va'achel bisrat safra, parech liba kitzafra. They both say if you do bloodletting, that interesting is the mesukar is the Ran says is hakaza shal ksafayim, is ultimately doing bloodletting from your shoulders. So doing bloodletting from your shoulders and eating fowl afterwards is very dangerous. If a person does that, ultimately, again, parech liba ketzifra, your heart will flutter away like a bird. So, in other words, if that's the case, that you're doing bloodletting, so the same way that that fish is not included in your neder, so also chicken, fowl shouldn't be included in your neder. V'tanya ein makizin lo al dagim v'lo al opos v'lo al basar maliach. Furthermore, we learned about say that bloodletting, you don't do bloodletting if all you have to eat is fish or fowl or salted meat. V'tanya hikiz dam. If a person went and did bloodletting, lo yochal lo chalav v'lo gavina v'lo beitza v'lo shechalayim v'lo ofos v'lo basar maliach. So there's a whole host of things that you're not supposed to eat if you do bloodletting, including milk, cheese, eggs, cress, birds or fowl, right? Or salted meat. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? If we're setting this up as a case where the guy who took the neder not to eat meat had just engaged in bloodletting, then the truth is, and then he made the neder, so what we're saying is the neder wouldn't prohibit any foods that he's not going to eat anyway as a result, ultimately, of bloodletting. If that's the case, ultimately, again, chicken should be off the list, fish should be off the list. So what's going on over here? Shiny ofos, it's different. You could eat fowl after bloodletting. Why? The efshar al yedei shlika. I will say if you boil it. Apparently, again, fowl only has a detrimental effect after bloodletting if it's prepared some way other than boiling. But if you boil it, you're good to go. You can eat it. Abaye Amar Kigon, Dikayvin le'enai. Enai. So since Abaye said, what's the case? The guy who made the neder that I'm not going to eat meat, he was suffering from eye issues. Kayvin le'enai, literally his eyes hurt him. He was having eye issues. The dagim kashim le'enayim. And everyone knows fish is very detrimental when a person is having eye issues. Iachi, achil dagim. 1 second. Fish is bad for eye issues, just the opposite. Fish is good for eye issues. Listen to this, Rabbi Say. The Ha'amar Shmuel, nun samich ayin. Rabbi Say, what's nun samich ayin? This is absolutely incredible. So what's the Gemara says? Nuna. Nuna is Aramaic for fish. Nuna is Aramaic for fish. Samich, Rabbi says, a little play on words. Samich, sama, means a remedy. Ayin is enayim, is eyes. So Rabbi says, so the Gemara says, fish is actually very detrimental, very beneficial if one is suffering from an eye issue. Nun samich, just remember, nun samich ayin. Nuna, fish. Samich, sama is a remedy. Ayin, le'enayim, for the eyes. Hahu, sof ochla. To which the Gemara says, Rashi explains this over here as meaning, when you're at the end of the eye issue, that's when fish are beneficial. But at the end of the day, at the beginning of the ailment, ultimately, again, fish is not beneficial. Good, Rabbi says, this close out the story. We're going to do Mesilas Yesharim. But Rabbi say, but before we get to Mesilas Yesharim, so remember again, how do we paskin? So Rabbi said, now this is very important. The Rambam paskins like Rabbi Akiva. Now remember, the Rambam psak, I'm sorry, I'll send it out. The Rambam psak has 2 parts. Rabbi say, let's start the Rambam paskins. If a person says, konam gerek alai, I'm not going to eat vegetables, the Rambam paskins, a gourd is mutter. A gourd is mutter. Now, Bosai, that's in alignment with who? With who? With everyone. Bosai, remember again, we said this before, with everyone. Why? Because even Rabbi Akiva agrees that a gourd is not a yarek. So if all you're saying is konam yarek alai, vegetables should be usher to me, everyone agrees vegetables do not include gourd. Do not, right? Yarek only includes yarek, not gourd. However, if you see, like the Gemara said, yarek hamisbashel bikidera, right? A person says what? A person says, konam alai, I prohibit to myself any vegetables cooked in the pot. Then I will say, what does that include? What does that include? Gourd. So the Rambam Paskin is like Rabbi Akiva the whole way through. What's the logic? I will say, why does Yerek HaMesbashal B'Kedera include gourd? Because the logic just is, if you just wanted to include vegetables, you should have just said what? Yerek. The fact that you're expanding it and saying Mispashal, what is Mispashal B'Kedera? What does that mean? So in Rabbi Akiva's worldview, what that means is what? What does it come to include? What does it come to include? Substitutable items. That's the operative phrase. Right? According to Rabbi Akiva, the mispashal b'kedera appendage to the neder, which was unnecessary, comes to include anything that shaliach would substitute were he dispatched to purchase yarek and were there to be no yarek. Now, I will say, it could very well be that there's other things that are included in this category besides gourd, right? But lamaisa, we're including gourd. So therefore, we'll say that's how the Rambam paskin. So again, if you just say yarek just includes vegetables, not a gourd. If you say yarek hamispashal b'kedera, it's yarek and anything which could be substituted for yarek, i.e. the gourd. Now we'll say shkoyach. Let's stop here. Let's do a little Mesilas Yesharim for the few moments we have left. All right, so we'll say good morning. So we are picking up today, Baruch Hashem, brand new parak ahead of us today. Quite amazing. Today we begin. Today, Sunday, the 24th of Kislev, Erev Chanukah, December 18th, we begin the 15th parak of Mesilas Yesharim. The title of this parak, very, very, very exciting parak, B'darchei Kniyas HaPrishos. So also we spent a lot of time focusing on the three different levels of Prishos, right? There are three different categories of Prishos. Now we're going to focus on how does one acquire the midah prishus. So I'll say, here we go. We'll say the best way to acquire the midah of prishus, so we'll say the best way to reach a level of prishus, says Ramchal, is that a person should look at the various pleasures of this world and see how fleeting they are, and how meaningless it is, and how it could bring us ultimately again to a real state of spiritual existential danger. Because we'll say the fact that we are drawn to certain pleasures, and we'll say we know that sometimes once I allow myself to be drawn to certain things, it takes so much effort to pull myself away. We'll say, why is that? Because often I see things which are very pleasurable, which look very nice and look very enticing. My eyes see it, and therefore what happens? I want it, and I'm drawn to it. Therefore, he says, Rabbi say, this is how the first sin occurred. How did the first sin of Adam and Chava occur? See, he quotes over here, Vatera Isha Kitov Ha'etz L'Machal V'Chisava Hu Le'inayim V'Nechma Ha'etz L'Haskel Aticha Me'Pir V'Tochal. I will say what happened. Chava was enticed by the pre. How was she enticed by the pre? By looking at it. It looked really nice. She saw it. She's like, this would be wonderful for me. How much more pleasurable life would be if I just had that particular fruit. So I'll say she was drawn in ultimately again by what she saw. Aval, so I'll say, so what the Ramchal is saying over here is that sometimes the way to acquire prishus is, I want something, but now before I take it for myself, pause. Let me look at it. Let me study it, right? What is going to come from this? If I take this, if I enjoy this, if I consume this, right, or I bring it into my life, what's gonna happen? See, the danger with Chava was she saw it, she desired when she saw it, and like she didn't stop. Therefore, the Ramchal says, Aval, so we'll say a lot of times in life when I see a particular pleasure or luxury, and before I partake of it, I stop it and I study it. And I ask myself, like, is this good? Or is it really just an imposter of good? It's cozy, it's not really good. It's not really good. It looks good. It seems pleasurable. But at the end of the day, this is not going to have the desired effect. Umeduma ubelishum hasmada nechona v'hara bo amiti ukarv livalid mimenu be'emes vaday sheyimas bo v'lo yirtzeu klal. So Rabbi said, this is incredible. The first way in which we acquire the midah prishos, the first step to prishos is incredible, is something crazy and wild. And it's called thinking before we act. I know, it's like a chiddush. Thinking before we act. I see something. Everyone say, it's interesting. I went over to see my granddaughter on Erev Shabbos, and recently her mother started letting her have lollipops. So I went over, and I saw her early in the day. I gave her a lollipop, and I brought over another lollipop before Shabbos, and I made such a mistake. Like, I became that grandparent who does something that the parents are like, why'd you do that? Right? So like, I brought like this fancy lollipop. I said to my granddaughter, this is for tomorrow. It's for Shabbos. She's starting to sleep in a bed. So I said, for tomorrow, if you sleep in a bed. So she took it, and like me, like I'm thinking, oh yeah, I reasoned with a 2-year-old, and I told her, we're gonna save this, and it's gonna be good. She takes it. It's like, open it, and I'm looking at my son. Like, I can't believe I just did this. Like, what should I have done? Like, I should have given it to my daughter, to my son-in-law. Say, like, here, this is for tomorrow. Give her a treat. Instead, I give it to. I always say, because what happens? a 2-year-old gets something, they see it, open it, I want it. Well, you know how incredible it is that most of us don't outgrow that? It's pretty incredible. That, in other words, we see something, like, open it, I want it, I want it, I want it. And then Chal says, whoa, pump the brakes a little bit, right? You see something, right? Okay, should you have it? Should I have it or not? And if I do take it, like, what are the ramifications of having that in life? But often what just ends up happening is, I see something, open it, want it, eat it, consume it, enjoy it. Instead, the Ramchal says, but one second, you never have the chance to, like, analyze this. Is this life lollipop, so to speak, is it something you should have? Is it good for you? Is it going to set you up for success? Again, I will say, the Ramchal is not telling us, remember, the Ramchal is not telling us, swear off every single pleasure. What he's just saying is, before you partake of it, right, before you say open it, ask yourself, good, not good, put you on the right path, not put you on the right path, further your ruchnius, detract from your ruchnius. That's all. The Ramchal says, how many situations we would save ourselves from if we just took the time to stop and think, instead of living life like a 2-year-old and just opening and enjoying every single physical pleasure that comes our way. An incredible idea. He goes on, he says, a person has to teach himself this process, to understand that not every pleasure is good. And certain things are mostly, by the way, I want to point out over here, he's not talking about anything illicit, right? He's talking about things that are all kosher, right? Again, there were like 15 hashkachas on this lollipop. Only the best for my granddaughter. 15 hashkachas on the lollipop, right? And I will say, but lamaisa, just because there's 15 hashkachas doesn't mean that it's the right thing to have in that moment. At the end of the day, it could be totally mutter, it could be totally kosher. But when I stop to think about it, I realize, you know what? This is probably not good for me. Probably doesn't put me on the right path. And he gives an example over here of eating. He says, ultimately, and eating is the easiest thing that people could get carried away with. Is incredible. So he says over here, eating is the most incredible thing. People put so much emphasis on it. He's not even talking about overeating over here. He's talking about over here just like people who get so carried away with their food. And the Ramchal says, think about this, right? You can only consume the amount that fits into your mouth, right? And I will say, and what happens after it goes into your mouth? After it goes to your mouth, right? It becomes mush in your digestive tract, and then you excrete it, right? In other words, I will say, so that's like all that money you spent on that food, all that money you spent on that experience, and it ends up just being digested and excreted. He says, "V'kach yesavem achal barburim avusim kimam achal lechem kibar." I will say, isn't it incredible that you can be just as full from eating barburim avusim, right? Literally the best cuts of meat, right? Actually, he says over here, barburim avusim. I will say is what we say in Zmiros. Right, he says here, tarnagolim mifutamim, right? Fattened hens, right? So fattened hens, right? A delicacy. It's amazing, says Ramchal, that you become just as full from fattened hens as you are from coarse bread. And I will say, Ramchal's not, again, to be clear, Ramchal's not suggesting that we just eat coarse bread. That's not what he's suggesting. What he's saying is, it's interesting to think a little bit, right? 3 hours later, the same satiety that you have from the fattened hens is what you're going to have from coarse bread. It's just saying to think. I will say, does it mean that a person shouldn't have the delicacies? No, enjoy the delicacies. But just think a little bit. It's so easy to get carried away with all of these things. Yet the net effect of coarse bread versus fattened hens is the same thing. He says, "Lu achal menu kidei svia koshakain im yasser ali b'achalam harab shecholim lava la machmas achilaso ulefachos hakovet shemagiu achar achila v'ashanim hambehim lesichla." I will say similarly again. You get carried away with food. You eat too much. I will say a person feels sick. Then feeling sick ultimately again impacts so many other things. Hine Kol eila vade shelo yachpotz adam b'davar hazeh, kevan shetovaso eino tova v'ra v'ra'as. Well, see, therefore, again, the Ramchal says, the first step to prishus is just thinking. Just thinking, should I have this, shouldn't I have it? If I have it, what's going to happen? If I don't have it, what's going to happen? And just to think, not to live a life of open it, not to live a life of a 2-year-old, but just to think before we enjoy. Let's just finish up. Everything is just like eating. It's amazing to say, when a person begins to think about pleasures before partaking of them, you realize something amazing, which is every single pleasure gives you a very limited shelf life of enjoyment. It's fleeting. It's just fleeting. In other words, it doesn't stay for you for too long. It just simply fleets, or is fleeting. He goes on, here's what's amazing about pleasure. What's amazing about pleasure is the pleasure itself usually lasts for a very short amount of time. But the negative effects from overindulgence in life's pleasures could last a lifetime. And all the Ramchal said, isn't that incredible? The pleasure you get from things, it's always very limited, very short, very temporal. The fallout from making bad decisions and overindulging in the pleasures of life, that fallout could last a lifetime. So therefore, both say step number one in inculcating within ourselves the midah of prishos is before partaking of any pleasure, just stop to think. I will say, to be clear, does stopping to think mean don't enjoy it? Don't indulge? No, it could very well mean don't indulge. But at least think to yourself again, okay, what's the effect of this action? What happens over here? If I enjoy this, then what? If I partake of this, then what? And even if you partake of it, at least you're partaking of it, again, with an understanding of the repercussions, an understanding of the potential effects. And again, I will say that leads one to just a more mindful, thoughtful life, and will lead one to say, certain things I will partake of, and certain things I'm going to pass. So we'll say, Shkayach, we'll stop over today. Mitzvah to be continued tomorrow. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. David, have a great day. Mr. Ringo, Shalom Aleichem, nice to see you. Again, Michael, Chaim, have a great day, everyone.
Sorry. In the United States, they call it herbs.
Say, Yarek, you're saying?
It's our herbs.
Herbs, right.
Not because the vegetable, you call vegetable, zucchini, squash, everything's called